of the University of San Carlos. The Cebuano Studies Center is a center of research on all aspects of Cebuano culture. It functions as a special library to house source materials pertaining to Cebu, as well as the predominantly Cebuano-speaking areas in the country. A research center devoted to studies pertaining to Cebu in the area of the humanities and social sciences, and a special office assisting in the promotion of Cebuano culture and the arts. Over the years, it has become an active instrument in encouraging and supporting research activities within the university in the areas of the social sciences and the humanities. In addition, it has become a model of its kind as a local regional research center in the country through its varied activities in the conduct and promotion of local regional studies. The Vicente Sotto lecture series is one avenue by which we do this. This monthly lecture series, which ran many years ago, has been revived under the direction of Dr. Hope Yu, with the goal of adding to the discussions on Cebuano culture, arts, and history. With these lectures, we hope to make the rich cultural heritage of Cebu more visible to the bigger public, and we hope to create venues where the public can join in the discussion with renowned researchers and experts in the field of Cebuano studies. Since reviving the Vicente Sotto lecture series, we have heard from several esteemed researchers who talked about different aspects of our history, culture, and local tradition. We are very honored to have with us today architect Melva Java as our speaker. Today, she will be giving a lecture on how the nature of ecclesiological observances has impacted the shaping of places of worship, particularly Cebu's colonial churches. The lectures we bring to you serve as acts of cultural production, which also serve as a means of boosting cultural identity. Whether tangible or intangible, culture plays a key role in reinforcing identity, binding together a community, and diversifying our national identity. It is in this spirit that the Vicente Sotto lecture series has taken shape. So on behalf of the Cebuano Studies Center, I welcome all of you today. Thank you.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Dr. Bea. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind once again that towards the end of our program, we will be posting in the chat box a link to an evaluation form that we would really like for you to fill out before the program ends. Also, another important thing is that if you have any questions for our speaker about the topic that she will be discussing today, then please feel free to type them down in our chat box, and we will be monitoring these questions, and we will do our best to address as many of them as we can during the open forum. Okay, so without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, architect Melva Rodriguez Java. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in architecture, a master's degree, and a doctoral degree in anthropology. She founded and became the first dean of the College of Architecture and Fine Arts of the University of San Carlos in 1984. She is an alumna of the United States Government International Visitors Leadership Program, having been granted a study tour of schools of architecture in the United States in 1992. A UNESCO scholar, she trained in the conservation of World Heritage Sites in Hiroshima, Japan in 2005. She has delivered papers on heritage preservation in international conferences in Sydney, Australia, Hokkaido, Japan, Jakarta, Indonesia, Penang, Malaysia, and Mexico City. In 2007, she earned recognition from the Cebu provincial government as a Cebuano trailblazer with the title of Keeper of Heritage. She is presently executive member of the National Committee on Monuments and Sites of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Currently, she is a consultant for the Cultural Heritage Studio of USC. She is the author of a heritage conservation book entitled Illustrated Manual for the Repair and Maintenance of Spanish Period Structures in the Philippines and the History of the Capital of Cebu. Honestly, reading that out, I got really excited for what we have in store. So, ladies and gentlemen, a warm virtual round of applause for architect Melva Java.
Thank you very much, Ms. Maria Kim, for that very nice introduction. And it's an honor and a pleasure for me to be part of this Vicente Sotto lecture series. And I thank Dr. Hope Sabampanyu and Assistant Director Bea Martinez for inviting me to this lecture series. Thank you very much. Okay, I will now share my screen and start my presentation. The title of my presentation is Worship and Cebu's Colonial Churches. It's just a kind of a brief rundown on the situation of our colonial churches in Cebu in view of the changes called for by Vatican II and our heritage churches being historical. There may have been some problems in accommodating the changes of Vatican II. We'll try to see this afternoon how we can accommodate these changes, if possible at all, in order for our liturgy and worship to continue as it has been, traditionally observed through two millennia already. So let's begin with the outline. There will basically be just 5 parts, a bit of Christian worship and theology background, because when I talk about the typology of Cebuano churches, I would like to put it in the context of where the Cebuano colonial churches came from and a bit of what we are doing in this century, 20th and 21st century. And we will talk about Vatican II and its advice contained in Sacramentum Concilium on how to redesign or update the spatial disposition of our churches. And then, of course, we are aware that there have been kind of misunderstanding and liberal interpretations of what Vatican II called for. And let's listen to some comments from some knowledgeable people on what they think about these so-called liberal interpretations. We have a couple of post-conciliar views. We would like to hear from Pope Benedict XVI and also from Pope Francis on what they feel should be done about Vatican II and the interpretations of Vatican II, which have become controversial. Then we look again back to our Cebuano colonial churches and see how serviceable they will still be in view of the conciliar requirements. And finally, conclusion. All right, so Christian worship and liturgy, it's church on the move. Just a bit of an introductory remark here. Expressions of Christian worship have been developing over the last 2 centuries. The church, ever on a pilgrimage, quote unquote, has moved from its Jewish roots through early Christian observance, medieval practice, to modern day interpretations. And these are all reflected in diverse buildings designed for worship, which in Catholic Christianity we call churches. The last 50 years or so saw liturgical reforms promulgated by the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II for short, 1962 to 1965. Early in this century, Pope Benedict XVI, appalled by certain questionable interpretations of the council documents of Vatican II, advocated for a so-called reform of the reform. And he called for an organic renewal with more deference to tradition and history. For his part, Pope Francis stresses that the mission of the Church, the mystical body of Christ, Church in capital letters, especially those who are in the physical and existential peripheries, are to be looked after. And the mission of the Church is to evangelize the people of God, especially those who have not heard yet of the good news. So this paper considers how this emerging nature of ecclesiological observance impacts on the shaping of places of worship. In particular, we will see how this will impact on the Catholic churches, especially the colonial churches of Cebu. Okay, I think I will just use this mode of presentation. Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict, always stressed the theology of the liturgy as an offshoot of Jewish roots, which he considers a manifestation of the essential unity of Old and New Testament. The archetype, the so-called ecclesia, the community on the Sinai tent of the encounter here in this picture, that's the tent built by Moses, and it's supposed to be the repository of the Ten Commandments and the bread of the presence, and a perpetual candle of 7 candles to light the area, inside of which is what we might call the of our Holy of Holies or sanctuary in our churches. So in this particular picture, you see here the tent of Moses, which eventually became the temple built by Solomon. And after the Babylonian captivity, which destroyed the temple, they had to rebuild a second temple, which again was destroyed in 70 AD. But according to Ratzinger, in his Spirit of the Liturgy, a book which he wrote on worship and the liturgy, in Christian sacred architecture, it continues both and transforms the synagogue architecture. Here in this picture, you see here a picture of this, and you can see immediately the similarity between the Jewish synagogue, where Christ and the early Christians used to hold prayers and offerings, to our own churches. Here we also see the shrine of the Torah, and then it's equivalent now, our altar in the east apse of our church. No? So that is what Pope Benedict has always tried to emphasize, that our Catholic Christian modes of worship and liturgy actually derives from and is rooted from the synagogue ecclesia or synagogue church, which call the assembly together. But he emphasized that it is not just for a secular gathering, but rather the act of worship. And this is what Pope Benedict really wants to emphasize, that it's not just a place of encounter or a place but really a place where the assembly is being called together for a specific purpose, and purpose is worship. The call, according to Benedict XVI, the call comes from worship and leads back to worship. So teaching and catechesis were part of the liturgy of the Mass and the liturgy of the sacraments during the early Christian time. They came from homilies and from artworks. The sermons summarized beliefs and doctrines of the mysteries of the faith. Art borrowed much from pagan forms, but endowed them with Christian symbolism. Pictures at first were uniconic, but later on they were inspired from the Old and New Testaments. You see here a picture of the Christian church built during the time of the Emperor Justinian. Early Christians worshipped in discrete places for the breaking of the bread, but when Constantine allowed the practice of Christianity in the Roman Empire, worship moved to more public structures, including the Roman basilicas, and Christian gatherings eventually moved to more spectacular places, like the example you have here of the Hagia Sophia, which was built during the time of Emperor Justinian. And we'll have a cursory trip down history lane after the early Christian period. We move on to, we segue to the medieval period, and eventually the Romanesque. I'd like to show a little bit, to mention a little bit this historical background, because we'd like to appreciate better the Baroque churches of Cebu, which we had imbibed from the Spanish conquistadors and friars who came during the time that the Baroque was in vogue. But before that, we had the Roman and the Byzantine features in architecture, leading eventually to the Gothic, especially in the churches, which were building types that prevailed during that time. The Gothic, of course, is typified by the use of verticalities, and it sought to express transcendence through spires and spirals and finials, rather. So here we can see the symbol of the church is unity, with the unity of the living body composed of many different members, each purpose from the architecture of the central edge becomes different. The depiction is no longer that of the Pantocrator, the Lord of all. The image now superseded the image of the crucified Lord, the agony and death, and the story is told that of the historical events of the Passion and the resurrection that is made visible. So this is an example of some of the designs of icons that were very popular then during the early Christian and medieval times. The central icon is of the Paschal mystery during the medieval times, the crucified, risen, and coming again figure of Christ. And according to Cardinal Ratzinger, the icon must be a fruit of contemplation of an encounter in faith with the new reality of the risen Christ. And so it leads us in turn into an interior gazing, according to him, an encounter in prayer with the Lord. But we all, beholding the glory of the Lord with open face, are transformed into the same image from glory to glory by the Spirit of the Lord. So that is how important to Cardinal Ratzinger, the role of the icon is. Then we jump off to the modern, what we call the modern period, which is really composed of Renaissance and Baroque. If we follow the thinking of architect Winan Claassen, who wrote history of Western architecture. So we go to Renaissance around the 15th century, and in Renaissance time, the aim was not to duplicate antiquity, but to surpass antiquity. No, so we have names like Raphael, Brunelleschi, Bramante, Michelangelo, and the Renaissance man was typified as the noble, intelligent man of the world. And the Renaissance did something quite new. It emancipated man, and its beauty points beyond itself, but is content in the end with itself. The beauty of the appearing thing. You know? That's how architect Classen saw it. And we move on to the Baroque, because this is what will bring us to appreciate better Cebu's colonial churches. The Baroque, Christian Baroque, really tried to suggest the healing of the split after the Reformation through integrated spaces. So the so-called attempt to heal is kind of expressed through spaces, and the integration of the spaces was forceful and dramatic and dynamic, with very strong appeal to the senses. Baroque spaces convey vigor and exuberance, and the undulating lines convey the integration of man's soul and body, an attempt to synthesize vertical emphasis. And you can see this in our Cebu colonial churches, the vertical axis of the main facade integrated with the horizontal lines of the ground and the horizontal sections, horizontal axis of the earth supposedly combining with the vertical axis of heaven. That's what the Baroque architecture design and characteristics are supposed to speak of. So we move on now to the Baroque designs of Cebu's colonial churches. I think Pope Benedict has a particular liking for Baroque architecture and even Baroque music. Here I quote him as having said, "The altarpiece is like a window through which the world of God comes out to us. The curtain of temporality is raised, and we are allowed a glimpse into the life world of God." This art, Baroque art, is intended to insert us into the light of heaven. Again and again, we experience a Baroque church as a unique kind of fortissimo of joy and alleluia in visual form. So let's take some of the church inspired from the Baroque architecture in the West. The laws of the Indies in 1573 prescribed, among others, that towns, where the Spaniards would settle, especially those along the seacoast, were to build churches near the port in order to impress people with their prominence and majesty, even from a distance. So you can see that all around the island of Cebu. Most of the colonial churches are along the coastline. That was to follow the prescription of the law of the Indies in 1573. Yeah, we see them in Argao, Dalaget, Bohol, Oslob, Zamboan, Hinatilan, and all, even around up north in Pantayan. These church complexes also doubled as defense against any attack because they were in the coastline, so they were very vulnerable. So you can see in Bolon, for example, this is a fortress church, and this is a fortress wall. In Oslob, you have this cuartel and this fortress wall as well. In Argao, you have the fortress gate. No? So these were all built in defense of possible raids, from invaders. But we also had rectories. We had church towers and belfries. Of course, we had different kinds of church plans, the so-called Basilica plan, because this the rectangular, based on the Basilica plan in in Rome. And these are the cruciform plans, no, with the arms, we call the transepts. So the examples here of some of the plans in the basilica and cruciform type here. You have this one in Sambuan, the basilica type, another basilica type in Badian, and cruciform types, no? This one in the cathedral, of course, and in Dalaglet. Okay. So what are the significant elements of the Cebuano colonial church buildings? First of all, you have the idea of the church being heaven on earth, and that idea is being carried through from the open plaza, which is adorned appropriately, and up to the entrance door, which according to the John 10:9, the door of the church symbolizes what our Lord said as being the gate, no? And we quote, "I am the gate, he who passes through me shall be saved." So the main entrances of church doors are very heavily decorated. No? We see that in some of our churches, like in Argao, heavily studded, because they really represent Christ himself as the gate through which we all should pass in order to be saved. Then we have the church nave. The church nave is the main body of the church. This is the beautiful church nave of Katmon Church. And you can see here a veritable forest of trees in the ceiling. I am sad that the parish priest sometime a few years back covered it with a ceiling, but I hope that they will think of opening it up again so we can see the beautiful line of rafters and trusses there that hold up the roof. But the nave of the church really is where the pews are provided for the assembly. And the congregation traversing the nave are as pilgrims, so to speak, are as pilgrims toward union with the Creator, towards the altar. Many church naves in Cebu, like in Bolhoon, Argao, have kind of four vaulted ceilings, not really vaulted in the true sense of the word, but made out of wood and plywood. You know, the curved ceilings that you see, that's called vaulted ceiling. Yeah, but this is of interest really to me. We also have the sanctuary. The sanctuary is the area between the nave, that space between the nave and the apse, where the altar piece stands. No, here. Sanctuary is also called the presbytery. Is where the ministers perform their functions, and it contains the ambo from which the word of God is proclaimed, and then also the bread of sacrifice. No, the offering of bread and wine, which are consecrated during the liturgy of the Eucharist. And of course, you have the seat of the bishop, also the cathedra, if you're talking about the cathedral churches. The next picture here is the altar piece. This picture shows the altar piece. This one is the retablo reredo. It's also called the altar piece. No? The altar piece is a backdrop to the altar table. Originally, the altar table was just right here, attached to the altar piece. And in some cases, it's a standalone. In some cases, it is built into another wall. But during the Spanish period, the Baroque designs of Cebu colonial churches, we can see that they are made of wood that is finely carved with scrolls and geometric, floral, or fruit motifs. And they share common elements such as the short twisted columns, which they call Solomonic columns, which divide the niches into compartments, into which some of the figures of the saints are shrined. So the finishing usually is of gold leaf plating, and it imparts really an added sheen to the Baroque, Rococo, and classical moldings and other numerous sculptures in the round. And of course, after Vatican II, the altar, a new altar was installed at a distance away from the altar piece, and that has become also kind of debatable, as we shall see later on from the statements of Pope Benedict. And we have also these very beautiful pulpits, which are still existing in some churches, but sadly have been removed in others. No? The first part of the Mass, the liturgy of the word, is comprised of scriptural readings from the Old and New Testaments. Before the advent of modern sound technology, it was from the pulpit that the priest delivered the sermon. The canopy over the pulpit, this one here, is called a torna voz, and it served to spread the voice of the priest to echo, to allow it to reverberate and radiate throughout the entire nave. No? That's also very interesting. It's not really used for cover or like an umbrella, but it really is allow the sound to bounce back to the faithful who are seated in the pews. And then we have the crucifix. The crucifix, for the Christian, of course, the most powerful symbol of love and devotion is the cross. The other very interesting feature of the colonial churches, the Baroque colonial churches in Cebu, are the church paintings. The paintings in many churches in Cebu inspiration from European examples, from biblical stories from the Old and New Testaments that are retold in the ceilings of the churches. This one is the Laguet with the paintings about the Old Testament. This one is from Sibonga that tells the story of creation. And then another form of art that the of are the stone carvings. Here, atrial wall of a church made of coral stone, and you can see inside the atrial wall carvings of the Stations of the Cross. And these are some of the examples of the carvings, which are very symbolic. By the way, this carving of a pen, which they believe is, in a way symbolizes Christ. The pelican bird pecks on its breast and feeds its young with its blood, no? Symbolizing Christ also, who shed his blood for humanity. This is a very nice carving of one of the Stations of the Cross where Jesus meets his blessed mother. And you can see here just two hearts. You don't see the figures of Jesus and Mary. The heart of Jesus here is pierced with the cross, blessed mother that bound them together. No? So you can see really that the meeting of Jesus and his blessed mother is represented very strongly and emotionally, and anything else, I think anything else would have diluted the meaning of utter sorrow and grief. These are pillars in front of the church, and you can see here angels and gardens. Again, carvings done by Filipino, Chinese, and Spanish workers when the church was built. Okay. Brings us now to the 20th century, from Baroque. We'll do the Baroque later, but I would just like to show that in the 20th century, 1900 to like the 50s, we shifted away from the historical traditional designs and we had modern designs. No, for example, this one here by Rudolf Schwartz. His churches were designed very largely as spaces. The congregation would have a clear sense of presence of God. They tend toward minimalism of form. So it's a big change, no, and contrast from the Baroque churches that we had seen earlier. But it had multivalent symbolism. While the Roman Catholic worship had long been held in the longitudinal pathway church, as we could see in the picture I showed about the nave, that when you enter the church, you go to the altar, as if you're on a pilgrimage, no, longitudinal. Now the churches were uh, a ring church, like, so that the congregation and the priests are gathered around an altar. And this happened even before Vatican II. You know, this is advised also by well, it's seen by to have been advised by Vatican II. Again, that is debatable, but even before Vatican II, some architects already thought of designing churches in a circular manner. Another design of church, which is really very different from the basilica and cruciform types, is this Notre Dame de Haute in Ronchamp in France. This was designed by Miss Van der Rohe, and he said he was not interested in liturgy or transcendence. He was just interested in a universal form, an architecture which can accommodate any function. So his church, you know, is again multivalent. It looks like a hat in some from some angles. It looks like something else from other angles. But not only in the West, we also had our own modern churches here. You know, you can see that Leandro Locsin also designed circular churches even before Vatican II. Which brings us now to Vatican II. This is very interesting because this called for some changes to our traditional churches, and let's see how this will impact on the churches. No, for example, in 1969, after Vatican II, the general instruction of the Roman Missal on the arrangement of furnishings, it said that the churches should be marked by simplicity, it should be dignified, evincing noble beauty, and it should not be, you know, it should not be involved in any costly display. It should be a sign and symbol of heavenly realities, no? But in poor parishes, the church should blend with the surroundings, and it should not. And in affluent areas, it should stand as a countercultural sign of the church's option for the poor. Then, in terms of orientation, churches should be suitable for carrying out the sacred action and for ensuring active participation of the faithful. One of the purposes of Vatican II was to what they call aggiornamento, was to involve the faithful more dynamically, not just the priests and the ministers out there in the altar, but the faithful should also be involved. And so to ensure active participation, many buildings were redesigned around a circle where the priest on the altar is in the center, supposed to be more actively and dynamically involved. So here, in general instructions of the Roman Missal, again, it said that the altar should be set up versus populum. I mean, the altar should now be facing the people instead of the Tridentine Mass in the 1960s, where the priest turned his back to the people and just faced the altar and face. No, here it should now face the people. This interpretation and statement in question were clarified by the Congregation of Divine Worship as a suggestion rather than an obligation. But as you can see, even our colonial churches and churches almost everywhere, the priest is now turning towards the people. You don't see the priest anymore saying Mass as in the Tridentine posture, where he faced the altar and it was orientum, or towards the east. At the altar, what did Vatican II say? The altar on which depicted the sacrifice of the cross made present at the sacramental signs is also a table of the Lord. And this is where the people of God is convoked to participate in the Mass. It should be built separate from the wall. Now, if you remember the picture I showed you about the altar piece, the altar was attached to the altar piece. And on the altar was the tabernacle. Now it says it should be separate from the wall in such a way that it is possible to walk around it easily, and that the Mass can be celebrated facing the people, which is desirable wherever possible. So it was not obligatory, but supposedly desirable. And then there was something about the tabernacle also. It said that it is preferable that the tabernacle be located apart from the altar. Now, that is also very controversial because historically, the tabernacle has always been in the center of the altar, which was attached to the altar piece or to the tableau, no? Now, it's supposed to be now in an appropriate form or place, and not excluding it's being positioned on an old altar that is no longer used, no? Or even in some chapel suitable for prayer. Okay, so tabernacle was moved, and there was an advice on sacred art that again the care should be taken not to destroy sacred art, and in the interest of renewal, the advice of experts should be sought. So what happened after these injunctions? They were misinterpreted in many cases. So you can see now that the churches were designed very differently from the basilica and the cruciform types. No? So here you have 1975, this church, this plan. This is the plan of the church. Trifoil arches, and then this is how it looks. Almost inspired from the Miss Vandero Roncham Church. And then this is another example. Okay, it's not circular, but you can see that the nave, the pews are designed around the altar. It's no longer the longitudinal nave design, but designed around the altar. And then here, this one is in Cebu, in the Kalungsod Shrine near this SM seaside. And in our own University of San Carlos, no, this is our chapel. Architect Claassen designed the nave, again in a circular manner, with the altar in the center. So you can see in the plan, no, it's really circular. So the notion of a more intimate and communal church in shape is a sort of a hybrid between the traditional sacramental church and the classic evangelical styles. Evangelical styles are those which are, designed like auditorium where people listen to speakers. They're very popular among Protestant churches. So here you can see like a mixture of both. But you can also see the verticality here in this chimney-like protrusion. It's supposed to be expressive of exaltation and the experience of splendor, greatness, and commentaries about those designs. From Michael Rose, he wrote a book, Ugly as Sin. He says, the universal church had been blessed with beautiful churches that gave glory to God and were conducive to public worship and private devotion. Most Catholics appreciated the worldly flavor of the church, if you may call it that, no? With the high ceilings, stained glass. These churches were understood as sacred places. But he said, modern churches have been disconnected from the traditional church. Some of the new churches are designed in the shape of seashells, rocket ship, beehives, all right, lunar landing pads, no? And the designers of these churches claim the spirit of the Vatican as justification, which is wrong. I mean, the Vatican never said that, but these are just interpretations by some architects, no? Now, according to a priest, no, an SVD priest, the way that the reform in the liturgy was implemented was not based on dogma, rather it was based on theological opinions. He pointed out that changes in the liturgy were seen as breaking with tradition. Spaces were also seen as utilitarian and in some cases multi-purpose, so that the Mass could be celebrated in the morning, meetings held during the day, parties in the evening. Well, it just happened in many places. Okay, So, what are some of the post-conciliar views, given those very debatable and controversial designs after two? What are some of the post-conciliar views? I would just like to read the views basically by Pope Benedict XVI and then by Pope Francis. I'm so sorry. Okay, so here Benedict XVI feels very strongly about keeping tradition. He said, for example, regarding the church, he said there should be a reform of the reform. What we saw were the so-called reforms, but he wants a reform of the reform. He said our churches should be rooted to the celebration of the liturgy and not just to in individual tastes of some priests or architects. Pope Benedict really wanted the Eucharist as presence and sacrament not to be overshadowed by the Eucharist as a meal, because in some churches it's now like celebrating a meal as the early Christians did, but we forget the sacramental and sacrificial aspect of that meal as the Paschal meal, where Christ is offered as sacrifice and who earned for us a new life, in the resurrection. And to Pope Benedict, that should be the central concept of the celebration, not just a meal, but the sacrifice and the sacrament of the Paschal celebration. So on the church, the Pope said that in the celebration of the Eucharist, the priest facing the same direction as the faithful leads the church, the people of God, to meet the Lord, the rising sun of history. So he wants again the direction of the priest and the people all to be oriented towards the altar and to what he terms as the Lord, the rising sun of history. That's why he wants it to be what he calls ad orientem, facing the east. He clearly ties the architecture of the synagogue and later church to the calling of the assembly, not just for secular gathering, but rather for the act of worship. The calling, according to him, the assembly has a purpose, not just for gathering, but that purpose is worship, and the call comes from worship and then leads back to worship. So he wants to remind us that basically it's really the worship that is the center of the liturgy, and not just the coming together of the people as a mystical body of Christ, which is also part of it, but not the main focus of the worship. On the new orientation, the Pope said, the priest facing the same direction as the faithful, leading the people to God on their way to meeting the Lord, who is the rising sun of history, has found its sublime artistic expression in the sanctuaries of the first millennium, where representations of the glorified Christ mark the goal of the assembly's earthly pilgrimage through the nave to the altar, and that is supposedly the end towards which we are all journeying, towards the new Jerusalem that is now, that is what is called. We had the Jerusalem after the first Exodus, after the second Exodus, after deliverance from of humanity, by now are heading toward a new Exodus, towards the new Jerusalem. And that is what Pope Benedict would like the design of the church to convey. On the tabernacle, he said the correct positioning of the tabernacle be in another place, and he would like it to be returned near the altar, recalling the biblical text of the Holy of Holies of the temple. And he would like it to be conspicuous, that people who want to go and pray can easily access the tabernacle. I remember one of the statements of Michael Rose. He said he remembered when he entered the church and the tabernacle was no longer there, but was hidden in another place. He remembered what Magdalene was Mary Magdalene must have said when she saw the empty tomb. Where have they hidden my Lord? In search for that tabernacle. And then on sacred art, Pope Benedict said that the beauty, Romanesque, and the Gothic architecture of the medieval cathedrals reminds the faithful that the via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty, is the privileged and the fascinating path on which to approach the mystery of God. Yeah, he was really into beauty. And he said sacred art should reflect the beauty of the risen Christ. So he's not so much into these minimalistic designs. He really wants the beauty of the Baroque churches to be brought back to our churches. Now let's listen to what Pope Francis is saying. For Pope Francis, it is of a different approach. Pope Francis sees the real meaning and practice of the faith as a way of life in response to the love of God revealed in Jesus Christ, not so much in places or churches. According to Pope Francis, it is God's love that enables us to love him in return, to love ourselves, to love others. And he said, mercy is the first attribute of God. The name of God is mercy. So we see Pope Francis talking more about the Christian, the mystical body of Christ, the church, capital C, rather than the church building, as compared to Pope Benedict's concern about the holiness and the beauty of the dwelling place of God. So we have here some kind of two pictures, Domus Dei, the house of God, and the Domus Ecclesiae, the house of the people, the house of the faithful. Which one should it be, Domus Dei or Domus Ecclesiae? It seems to me that Pope Francis is recovering the concept of people of God as a Domus Ecclesiae. He teaches collegiality and really backs the liturgical reforms. And he's echoing the metaphors of the Good Shepherd. He said, bishops and priests must go to their flocks and know the people. He said, I asked you to be good, to be shepherds and smell like your sheep. And he cautioned bishops and priests against hiding behind their ceremonial rituals. So, very strong words, no? But to follow the model of Jesus as shepherd, who was willing to live among the sheep and to offer his life for him. So he's talking about a church for the poor, a church of the poor for the poor. This is how he thought about his name, Saint Francis of Assisi, in relation to the poor. For Francis, the preferential option for the poor is a non-optional option. So we have here two views of the church. Now, going back to our colonial churches, what about Cebu's colonial churches? What should it be, Domus Dei or Domus Ecclesiae? Serviceability of our colonial churches. In 2005, Cardinal Vidal enjoined all parish priests to consult with the Commission for the Church before undertaking any renovation work. Now we see renovation work going all around, the island of Cebu, sometimes without permission from the Archdiocese Commission for Church. But according to Cardinal Vidal, our churches should have an aura that induces people to pray. So here we have, again, harking back to the characteristic of the special disposition of churches, close to what Pope Benedict says. Now, there have been changes in our churches, no? We have some tabernacles being transferred to side altars, communion rails, choir lofts, pulpits have been removed. How can the traditional design of the colonial churches in Cebu more effectively advance the spread of the good news of salvation to the world? But I say, as an architect, despite these changes, which by the way are reversible, because you can really put back the tabernacle, you can bring back the altar to the retablo. These are reversible, but the Spanish colonial churches in Cebu, being traditionally longitudinal, with that long walk from the entrance to the altar as a pilgrim people, as a pilgrim church, this allows for the celebration of the extraordinary form of the Mass, or Tridentine form, which Pope Benedict likes, where the priest turns his back, not turns his back, let's just say turns towards the altar and towards the Orient, with the people together with him. But we can also use the colonial churches in Cebu for the Novus Ordo, the new church, the new masses after Vatican II, which are simpler really, and which has the more participation of the lay people as readers and extraordinary ministers. So let's see what else the Church of Cebu. Here is an example of a longitudinal church. The religious symbolism of the Spanish colonial churches in Cebu and also in Bohol. Bohol was part of our diocese before. They are contemplative, they are hierarchic, meaning the people here, the ministers there, and focus at the far end of the nave, this far end or the altar, is experienced during liturgy, not transcendental experience of the divine encounter. On the other hand, the people of God should participate in the liturgy according to Vatican II more dynamically. How do we let the full and active participation by the people happen in longitudinal churches without having to redesign it according to the new design of circular churches? Okay, according to Pope Benedict, that participation need not be expected only from ring lights. According to him, this full unconscious and active participation is both internal and external. The external actions are secondary to the internal feelings or action. It is the beauty of the ars celebrandi, the art of proper celebration, that will encourage the people, not the setting, but the beauty of the celebration that will encourage the people full and active participation. The profound connection between the liturgy should make us attentive to every work of art placed, in support of the celebration. And this beauty should be expressed by sacred art and sacred music. So the beauty of the celebration of the proper expression of the sacrifice should in itself already encourage the people for full and active participation, even without having to arrange the pews in a circular manner. So, concluding, I would just like to borrow this beautiful statement from a priest who wrote in this paragraph in the book Spirit of the Place. He wants to, as you could see, you can have both Pope Benedict's wish of what kind of a church or colonial church should be, and what Pope Francis wants, a more dynamic church that thinks of the poor, a more dynamic Christian assembly that is ready to burst out and go and proclaim the good news. According to Bert, church buildings with spaces created for both the assembly and liturgical and Eucharistic ministry, both for the assembly, liturgical multiplicity of experience, he said. He would like this to be the Domus Ecclesia, the people, more of Pope Francis type of church, the mystical body of Christ, the church. But church architecture also, with its appeal for transcendence and monumentality, the Domus Dei, house of God, and which our colonial churches, being Baroque in design, typify. The last 20 years has seen a recovery of this monumentality and more emphasis sacred and the contemplative dimension, in contrast to the church of the 20th century, which functioned mainly as meeting halls. So you have here possibility of having both, no? While admitting that a play of successive emphasis is indispensable, monumentality and hospitality in dialogue, liturgical, but also plainly human. No? And then we're down to our last two slides, because I would like to close really with the words of Pope Emeritus, this one here. Pope Benedict says very beautifully, one of the ancient axioms is lex orandi, lex credendi. How we pray is how we believe. No? How we celebrate the liturgy is an external manifestation of what we believe, and we can fully encounter Christ's transcendent beauty if we do not see Christ also in the list of our brethren. So you see here a very beautiful combination of both, you know, the liturgy as sacrifice and the liturgy as works of charity. The true form of beauty is found in self-gift of Christ on the cross, and this likeness of Christ is realized in the order of love that each and every person is a beautiful and essential participant in the liturgy of life, in the Mass also. Christ came into the world to conquer the ugliness of sin and death. Beauty of his redemptive love on the cross, self-giving beauty is re-echoed in the liturgy, and a true culture of life in a true beauty. Through this true culture of life, the church will be able to proclaim with Christ this one, in the New Jerusalem, behold, I make all things new. So with that, I say thank you so much for listening, and I'm ready for reactions, and I want to move this conversation forward and listen to your observations and comments about the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Architect Melva, for that very enlightening lecture. So it's very interesting to see how human thoughts and ideas are reflected tangibly in architecture. So and the focus of the lecture being on Roman Catholic cathedrals here in the Philippines. So we've asked our speaker if she could answer some of the questions that you have shared. We have a collection of questions. Some are in the chat box and some are also shared outside. So we'd like to bring this to the attention of Architect Melva. So the first question we have here is from Paulo Lastimosa. How did the burial designs of colonial churches change over time?
Burial designs?
Yes.
Okay. With the law. Okay. Very early upon the arrival of Christianity in the archipelago, of course, they built settlements and churches. Most of the burial sites were just attached to the, in reference to friars and the ilustrados, no? Were just attached to the church, right, on a side yard, and you can still see these tombs and graves, like for example in Boloon, entering the church. To the right, you have this they call it ermita, but it's really, an old cemetery. But during the loss of the Indies in 1573, it was found to be unhygienic, and there were new requirements to move the cemeteries and burial sites about a kilometer radius away from the church. So that as far as I know, is how the burial practices changed. But before the loss of the Indies, I think some priests and maybe some saintly people were buried even in the thick walls of the churches, because these were very thick, 3-meter thick walls, and they would use this also as tombs or for certain selected personalities and priests.
All right, thank you, Architect. And we have a question also that is not from the chat box. It's about Baroque architecture. And you mentioned that after the Reformation, there was an attempt to heal and that was characterized in interior spaces conveying vigor and exuberance, undulating lines symbolizing man's soul. So the question was, how do other cultures and peoples achieve the same effect?
The same effect. The same effect of healing, you mean? Well,
Perhaps
anyway, okay. I'll just try to answer it.
Man's soul?
Okay, I'll just try to answer it from what I understand. No? There was an after the Reformation, there was a break, no? And Catholic Church had to kind of think of ways of attracting perhaps some Christians back. And
That's
one way of doing this was perhaps to build churches that would really bring, catch the attention and want to interest them as much that they are brought inside to really revel in the splendor and the magnificence of the Rococo and the opulent designs of the Baroque. Probably that was one way of bringing the people there through visual enticements, bringing the people back to church. But of course, that's only a start, no? Because the healing really goes farther than just physical coming to a church. But how do people in other cultures achieve healing through space? That is also very interesting, because one of the articles I read about Bert Daliman, the guy who I quoted there during the conclusion, he was talking about what he calls a synesthetic space, where a space must first kind of invite somebody to go and enter, and then once inside would be stimulated by what he sees, and he moves forward and takes in what he sees and enjoys, and then affords touching and making decisions as to which nook or cranny he would be. In other words, he appropriates the space. And what to Daily Man, that space is a healing space, which we can see also in many of the places we see around us in nature, in gardens, under trees, or in seashores. Those are healing spaces given by nature. And it can also happen that architects can design such beautiful healing spaces, to kind of assuage a hurt inside psychologically or even spiritually. And architecture can do that to some extent.
Thank you, architect. Yeah, that's true. So thank you. And we have another question here in the chat box by Nikki Belen. What are the biggest perils that these historical churches face aside from use in modern day?
Okay, there are many perils, aside from the natural disasters, of earthquakes and fires and natural deterioration. I see many of the churches along the coastline of Cebu deteriorating from wrong interventions. There were probably some cracks that the priests and some of the well-meaning parishioners saw, and they tried to heal the cracks by using cement and reinforcing bars. And this today, we can see many of these appearing to be more of a problem rather than the solution, because the reinforcing bars are rusted and they push back the cement. And we saw the cracks now much bigger and more dangerous, because places more dangerous, because if these cracks are on horizontal slabs, the slabs could fall down on people. So these are some of the dangers happening from natural disasters, from ill-advised interventions, from lack of maintenance, and also from individual decisions on what a space ought to be, without reference to the main function of the church space, which is really, according to Benedict, liturgy and worship. So if you design a space and make it open to kind of exhibits very often, or tourists without advising the tourists to properly dress themselves or to properly comport themselves inside. This can all be very harmful in many ways, not only physically to the existing churches in Cebu, especially these heritage churches, because they are kind of fragile and very vulnerable to to crowds really and other pollutants.
Thank you, Architect. Again, another question from Bench. Hi, Architect Melva Java. Thank you very
Hi.
much for the informative session. How did the Protestant churches alter the Roman Catholic cathedral designs after the Reformation?
I think the Protestant groups decided to assemble themselves and do their prayers and rites and rituals in their own new spaces. I can see, I watch a Protestant channel very often, as often as I watch EWTN, I watch TBN, and I can see that the pastors speak in places that are like auditoriums with huge stage and even with bands playing. This is more the Protestant type of places of assembly, as against the longitudinal cathedral, which is more solemn and quiet and even dark. So this is the difference between the old medieval churches and the new Protestant areas now, which are more open and more inviting for people to come and gather and assemble.
Right. So here's something more related to Filipinos. There's a question here at the side. Was there any way that Filipino influences made their mark in these cathedrals that make them different from their Spanish sources? Was a Filipino the main architect of these buildings, or was that reserved for the Spaniards? And do we know the names of the painters of the ceilings?
Okay, that's interesting. These Baroque churches were built in the 16th, 17th centuries, and we did not have Filipino architects yet. I think our pensionados were available only when they returned from studies abroad during the late 1800s. No, but when these churches were built, they were initiated by the Augustinian friars or by the Franciscans or Dominicans. There were 5 orders, I think, that came over, the Jesuits, and they each had their own blueprints based on their European experiences. And that was the one that was followed, because the Filipinos did not have much experience building churches. We never had, because we used to worship our deities in little shrines made of bamboo and adorned with garlands, and our babaylans doing our the priestly work for us. But when the Christianity came, this was a totally different Christian culture and Christian way of religious observance. We did not have experience there. I think Filipinos were still part of the building of these churches as part of the workforce, probably even as maestro de obra, but not necessarily the planner or designer of these churches, because of the fact that there was no experience really among Filipino builders and workers of Spanish churches. The question about the painters, yes. Yeah, Raymond Francia painted the beautiful ceiling paintings of the creation in Sibonga. And I think he was also partly responsible for the Old Testament paintings of Dalaget. And since Bohol was also part of the Diocese of Cebu, he also went to Bohol and did quite a number of paintings in the ceilings of many Bohol churches. Canuto Avila and his sons, I think. Oh, by the way, Dalaget, I think, was Canuto Avila and his sons, the Dalaget. Francia did partly, I think, Polhoon also. No? I do not really know the original authors anymore, because many of the ceiling paintings have been painted over, including the signature of the original painters. But I'm glad that the signature of Francia, Ray Francia, is still in the Sibonga ceiling. And that of Canuto Avila and Sons, Canuto Avila y Hijos, is still in the Dalaget ceiling.
Okay, thank you. And I have a follow-up question to that, architect, which is my own.
Yes.
Were these painters trained abroad, or were they trained locally?
I don't think anybody was trained abroad yet at the time that they painted. They were given stampitas, pictures of the Bible or some saints by the priests, and they were asked to copy this. But they had this innate skill or talent already of doing figure painting. So it wasn't very difficult for them to follow, to copy these biblical scenes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, all right. And I had another question also. It's my own again.
Sure.
I was wondering about, because we're focusing on Cebu cathedrals, and I was just wondering if other provinces also have similar cathedrals, or does Cebu just have more? Or I'm not really familiar. I'm just wondering about that.
I think when Christianity spread in the archipelago, more or less the same forms of churches, either basilica type or cruciform types, were built, and many, again, because of the law of the Indies, were built along coastal areas. So many of these were fortified churches, with thick walls made of stone, in the perimeter of the ground. But the difference probably is that in the Visayas we use coral stones. Our people would dive into the reefs and cut huge boulders of coral stone, bring them to the shore, and then cut them into tableas. The smaller, maybe 10 by 10 inches coral stones that they would eventually set up as walls and parapets of churches. But in other places, I think they were, for example, I think in Miagao, that very beautiful World Heritage Church there, I think it's made of sandstone. In Abra, in Albay, they use what they call the adobe, or these are volcanic tufts that after the eruption were thrown, and the people use these huge boulders, cut them into blocks again, and use them to build the stone. So it mattered a little bit in terms of material, but basically the shapes, the designs, they were all inspired from Baroque or Renaissance, or even the Rococo, which is the later part of the Baroque. Again, inspired from Mexico or from Spain, from where these different order of friars came.
I find that interesting, architect, that the materials they used are kind of reflect where they are situated geographically.
Yes, it's very interesting also.
We have a question from Clarissa Sevilla. Why were the churches in the past, for lack of a better term, ridiculously ostentatious? Isn't loyalty and religiosity more important than the physical place of worship?
Oh yeah, of course, that is the most important thing. Ars celebrandi, the way we celebrate, is more important than the way we show how we celebrate. No, I mean, the external manifestations are less important than the internal intent, according to Pope Benedict. But we also had this intent of building something. This is the house of God, and God deserves all that I can give. If I can make it beautiful, and if I can put in gold leaf or even pearls or shells from the sea to make it look beautiful, because it is the Domus Dei, the house of God, I would do it. Probably some of the designers were of that kind of thinking, and so they went ahead, and some patrons also, the richer ilustrados of the areas, also donated probably some of the materials and gold leaves. In fact, very lately, just a few years ago, a rich balikbayan in Argao donated gold leaf, and so they painted the tableau all gold. All gold. So we lost the polychromatic original finish of the Santoses. The NHCP did not like what happened, so they had to remove the gold, and now it's back to the polychrome. But there are ways of how people express their the splendor of the Godhead by the kind of art that they do. And or if they want to do it, I mean, you know, it's okay. I mean, we also see this, you know, for posterity. We've seen many of these existing cathedrals and still marvel at their beauty. And some, as according to Pope Benedict, via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty also brings us, you know, into transcendence and think of heavenly things, and eventually think of the New Jerusalem or the heaven hereafter. So that's what I think art should do, like exalt us and bring us to higher realm of ecstasy. And in the case of spiritual art, I think brings us closer to God, the beauty of God, Jesus Christ, the beauty of his self-giving. And that, according to Pope Benedict, should be the kind of beauty that we should all aspire to. Self-giving, self-sacrifice to God and to each other. And so if that can be expressed also in beautiful churches, I would be happy to see one.
Thank you, Architect. Okay, Clarissa said, thank you for answering, Architect Java. I forgot to mention that the people who are asking these questions are expressing their thanks after you on the chat box. So
you're welcome.
We have two questions from Irene Silvet. Was there a major religious event in the Philippines which significantly affected the architecture of our churches? And second, just personal curiosity, what do you think about minimalist architecture for churches in the Philippines? Do you like it, or do you prefer Baroque architecture?
You know, both Baroque, classical, medieval, and minimalist architecture have their own, shall we say, have their own way of bringing us to transcendence. The last slide that I wanted to show was a minimalist church, very stark, just a wall made of glass. But when the light came in, you know, it really brought you elevated you to things above. You know, that's minimalist architecture. In another way, the very effusive Baroque architecture also brings you, you know, according to Pope Benedict, a fortissimo of joy, you know, in Baroque cathedral. So both can do their part in elevating us, you know, above our mundane feelings and existence. So in terms of the events, yes, okay, very in just a few, not a few, but maybe 2013 or 8 years ago, we lost the belfry of the Santo Niño. It's now rebuilt, but that was a major catastrophe. Although the earthquake hit Bohol, it also affected us here. It also affected the belfry of Cathedral and even the belfry of Argao and Dalaget. You know, and I think the earthquake in Negros also affected the belfry in Bajan, so that they had to remove, you know, the belfry on top of the church because of cracks, so many cracks here and there. I think the major events really that wrought havoc among our colonial churches were basically nature, source from nature. I mean, your earthquakes. One major event, the fire in Oslob gutted the original convento made of wood and tejas and the Tabique Pampango, and even the church. The church has been rebuilt, of course, but you know, it was caused supposedly by an overheated air conditioner. But it just shows sometimes that neglect, even from the human side, can also cause very serious damage to our churches. So kaming mga heritage conservationists, we always emphasize the necessity for preventive maintenance. Always look for areas where your heritage resource might be in danger, anay, for example, or rusted rebars, or electrical wirings that are very old already and can cause fire. I mean, checking up the heritage resource every 6 months or so will be very useful in saving vulnerable heritage structures from would-be disastrous impacts from nature and man-made challenges.
Okay, thank you. So we have a really long one here. It's from Joseph Solis Alcaide Alberici. The promulgation of the Vatican II that aims to make the Catholic Church layman-centric over clergy-centric has a negative consequence, where it paved the way for the boom of evangelical Protestantism in Cebu, because many former Catholics like myself felt that the architectural and liturgical changes in the Catholic Church after the Vatican II have deprived its traditional Hispanic Catholic identity and turned the church into a poor man's version of mainline Protestant churches. My question, how should the Catholic Church address these grievances of disgruntled Catholics about the architectural and liturgical changes of the church after the promulgation of Vatican II? Thank you.
Actually, many of the changes in the church, as shown in my slides, were really misinterpretations of Vatican II. Vatican II really had very minimal injunctions regarding the design of churches, except that it should be of noble beauty and, if possible, also a church for the poor. And it should stay away from sumptuous display. I mean, these are very important things that I cannot disagree with. Those were the only injunctions of Vatican II. But the interpretations, if you go to the Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the document on churches and on liturgy resulting from Vatican II, you can see that there's just probably 2 or 3 lines about churches and just about noble beauty, just said about noble beauty. But it did say that the churches should allow for a more dynamic participation of the people of the ecclesia in the assembly, in the liturgy. So this dynamic participation is translated in our liturgy by bringing the lay people to read first reading, second reading, and then extraordinary ministers also distribute communion. So there's now more participation of the lay people. But there should be something also to be done about the ill-advised renovation of churches that are not even mentioned in Vatican II Sacrosanctum Concilium, but are mainly the decisions of some priests and some parishioners, and patrons of the church. No, so I think there should be a concerted effort by the commissions of the church, like the Archdiocesan Commission for the Heritage of the Church here in the Archdiocese of Cebu, to kind of explain to Catholics, our Catholic family, that our beautiful churches are supposed to stay as they are. Take care of them. They are beautiful. The liturgy is beautiful. There is nothing that says that something should be taken away. In fact, maybe if parishioners are more active, they can call for the return of the pulpit that was removed and probably hidden somewhere, the return of the beautiful tabernacle that's just maybe lying around in some bodega, the return of the beautiful communion rails that have been removed, because now people are receiving communion, according to lines formed in the main aisle. You know, there can be a return of these very beautiful features of the church, and the church will be beautiful again. But these were taken away, not because Vatican II said, but because of misunderstanding of Vatican II. And I think it's up to the Archdiocesan Commission of the Heritage of the Church to make this known to their parish priests in all the churches in Cebu and throughout the nation, that there's nothing that says you remove features of the church. In fact, keep them. The tradition should remain intact. The deposit of faith and artistry of the church is one of the injunctions of Vatican II that should be kept intact and safe. So the only thing that that was really called for was a more active participation of the people to go out really and to share the gospel and the good news. And I think that is the emphasis of Pope Francis, more than the emphasis on the church itself, but on the church building, but on the church as people of God.
Thank you, Architect. In relation to that about the cathedrals, there's a question here. What is your opinion about restoring old cathedrals? Is there an improper way of doing it that is counterproductive?
Okay, if you're thinking of old churches, because here in Cebu we have only one cathedral, no, because a cathedral is the seat of the bishop, the parish priest. The parish of the bishop, the church of the parish of the bishop is the cathedral. No? That's where the cathedral is, the seat of the bishop. But all the rest of the churches are churches. And what's the question again? About the cathedrals, no?
Yes, it was about, is there an improper way?
Oh, improper way, yes.
That's
Yes.
actually counterproductive?
Yes, you know, okay. It's like this. There's a heritage law in the country. It's Republic Act 10066. And in the heritage law, some of the heritage resources in the country are supposedly deemed protected by the state. And this includes many of our colonial churches. If a church or any building is more than 50 years old, it's already presumed to be an important cultural property and must be protected. Therefore, by law, they should not be touched in any way without first asking permission from the National Historical Commission or the National Museum or the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Now, there are many ways that people with good intentions add a room here, remove and change it into with another material, remove the paletada and expose the stones. These are ill-advised. These are ill-advised interventions because the paletada really is a sacrificial render. It protects the stone from deterioration. If you remove that, the stones will be exposed to acid rain, to water, to moisture, to vegetative growth. So the paletada should not be removed. Now that's one way of hastening the destruction of your church wall. If you want to put back the paletada, then use lime and sand. Do not use cemento, not Portland cement, because the Portland cement is very strong compared to the coral stone that you are finishing, and eventually the cement will peel off and will expose the coral stone again in patches, and it will look very ugly. So there are many ways that these heritage churches are treated in a very ill-advised manner and against the law, because the heritage work is actually governed by a lot of codes and charters. The basic charter that we follow is the Venice Charter, and it's very simple. It's just a one-page charter that says what is there should be kept originally if possible. No new material should be added unless it's compatible with the old material, and compatibility in terms of porosity and color and grain should be checked. You know, compatibilities and also visual compatibility, not just the chemical compatibility. There are many codes and charters that advise you how to do it. If you just go ahead and do interventions without reading these codes and charters, for sure you're gonna help in the destruction and the deterioration of the church, which will happen in no time at all. But I would advise anybody who wants to help in the preservation and protection of our heritage resources, especially our churches, to take hold. It can be downloaded online very easily. Venice Charter, the Bora Charter is also very easy to read, and it guides you step by step on what material to use, what to do, and what not to do. And the National Historical Commission of the Philippines also can help. They can even come and help you by giving technical assistance and demonstrating what to do. There are many ways that this can be approached, and there are many agencies in our country and even NGOs that can help in taking care of these heritage churches. All you have to do is ask, and they'll be very happy to come. Maybe after this pandemic, of course, there was a little lull after the pandemic because of the lockdown. But before that, teams from NHCP and NCCA would come and show parishioners and priests what to do, given a problem that they consult the experts with.
Okay, thank you, architect. And then we have a question also. You mentioned raids.
Yes.
Have we lost any articles of cultural significance through looting or raids that we have not yet been able to take back?
Oh, that one. I am sorry. I really don't know, because these raids happened 1700s, 1800s. They ended only in 1830, I think, in Bolhoon, when Father Bermejo taught the men how to build fast boats to run after the raiders, and then they built the baluartes where they could see from afar raiders coming in. I mean, so they were prepared as in those decades, late 1700 to up to 1830, when the raid stopped. That was too long ago, and probably there may have been, aside from slaves that were taken, there may have been also some articles that were like bells or whatever. But I really don't have a list, or I really don't have any knowledge about any article that was taken. I'm sorry, I cannot answer that. Maybe some of the older parish priests can tell us a story of what was taken,
Okay, thank you, architect.
Yeah.
So we have time for one last question.
It's all right.
Question from Bench again. He said, "Thank you for answering, architect.
Yes.
Curious, what is your favorite Cebuano structure and why?" He's Cebuano cathedral structure, but I think, like what you said, he means old church.
My favorite? Oh, it's difficult because so many of them have features that are typical to them, and I love them for that. And here's another one that has another feature, like, for example, the ceiling in Katmon. I really love that. And the atrial carvings on the wall of Argao, where those two hearts of Jesus and Mary, I also love that. And there are beautiful carvings on the facade of Dumanhog, which were done by all Filipino carvers, supposedly. Even the Maestro de Obra Cono was Filipino. So there are many aspects and features of different churches that I love, but to be able to choose one particular, I'll have to think about it yet. Yeah, I love all of them. And I hope the parishioners and the priests would really take care of them. And before they do anything, that they would consult Sana. They would consult us. We'd be very happy to help and go and assist in whatever way we can.
Thank you so much, attorney, for your time, for the lecture, and for also answering the open forum. So we, if you have any other questions that you might want to ask, this is for the viewers. feel free to message the Cebuano Study Center page on Facebook so that they can forward them to our speaker. Okay, so now to show our deepest appreciation to our esteemed lecturer, we'd like to present her our Certificate of Appreciation to be read by the Deputy Director of the Cebuano Study Center, Dr. Bea Lastimosa.
Dr. Bea, you are mute.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me repeat that. Thank you, Architect Hava, for accepting our invitation to speak today, despite today being a holiday. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your research, and your expertise with us. Thank you also to our participants who are here with us on Zoom and on the Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us today. So to show our gratitude, let me present from the University of San Carlos Cebuano Study Center this certificate of appreciation to architect Melva Java for her lecture entitled Worship in Cebu's Colonial Churches during the Vicente Sotto Lecture Series 2021, given this 30th day of August 2021 via Zoom, signed by the Vice President for Academic Affairs of USC and the Director of the Cebuano Study Center. Thank you very much, Architect Java, and thank you also to our host for today.
Yes, and I thank you, Dr. Bea and Dr. Hope, of course, and Maria Kim for hosting this. It was a pleasure, and I hope I was able to share something. Thank you very much. It was an honor being part of this lecture series.
Yes, indeed. Thank you once again, Architect Melva, and let's all give her another warm virtual round of applause, please. So we'll only be seeing those who are here with us on Zoom, but we also have a live feed on Facebook. So thank you very much. It's a wonderful opportunity to hear from our very own experts and scholars, which otherwise it would be so difficult to hear from them personally. So before we wrap things up, I'd like to remind everyone one last time to fill out the evaluation form, which has already been released in the chat box, so you can avail of the certificate of participation for this event. And we'd also like to take this time to announce our next speaker for next month's installment, local historian, Mr. Trizer Dale Mansueto. Okay, so you can see the poster being shared. And before we formally end, I would like to take this opportunity to announce that the deadline of proposal submission to the online conference Natural Lit, Being in Nature, Living with Literature has been postponed to September 5. This conference will be held on November 4. Full papers and creative work will be considered for publication. So please see again the link in the chat box for more details. So we've reached the end of our program. Before we go, may I request everyone, or as many participants as possible, to turn on your videos for a group photo. So Dr. Bea will take the picture, but please participate and turn on your cameras. Come on. I'm a teacher, so I know what it's like. You have to like beg people to turn their cameras on.
Hi, Miss Kim.
Hi, who's this?
Sorry, I couldn't turn. I'm using a gamer laptop. I don't have a camera.
Okay, that's also an excuse I hear from my students. No, it's okay. Okay, so let's smile the picture. 1, 2, 3, and smile. All right, thank you so much. So you can go back to Vivian. Okay, so thank you so much for attending this installment of the Vicente Sotto Lectures series, and we really hope to see you in the succeeding lectures. So goodbye and daghang salamat, and
Bye.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.